In the stillness of the night, Ramakrishna was deep in meditation, as usual, lost in the divine visions of his mother goddess, Kali. But tonight, something was different. Beside him stood Devotee, a stern monk with an unyielding presence. With a sharp piece of glass in his hand, Devotee leaned in close, pressing it against Ramakrishna's forehead, right between his eyebrows. "Cut her in two," he commanded, his voice cold, urging Ramakrishna to slice through the divine image of Kali that filled his mind. This wasn't just a simple request, it was a challenge to break the bond that had shaped Ramakrishna's entire life. What happened next would shake the very foundation of Ramakrishna's faith and lead him to a revelation that would forever alter the course of his destiny. But before the final severing blow could be made, before the image could dissolve into nothingness, we must step back to the very beginning. It was the early hours of February 18th, 1836, in the quiet village of Gamarpukur, Bengal. A baby boy was born to a humble Brahmin couple, Chandradevi and Khudiram. This boy would later be known to the world as Sri Ramakrishna. But the events leading to his birth were far from ordinary. 1 year earlier, in 1835, Khudiram went on a pilgrimage to the holy city of Gaya. After performing the sacred rituals for his ancestors, something extraordinary happened. That night he had a vivid dream. In his dream, he found himself inside a temple of Lord Vishnu, where his ancestors were joyfully receiving his offerings. Suddenly, a flood of celestial light filled the temple, and his ancestors fell to their knees. A radiant, divine being appeared, seated on a throne, and beckoned Khudiram to come closer. In awe, Khudiram prostrated himself before the being, who then spoke these words, "I am pleased with your devotion. I shall be born in your home and accept you as my father." Khudiram awoke with his heart filled with joy. He knew then that a divine presence would soon bless his family. At the same time, back in Gamarpukur, Khudiram's wife, Chandra, had her own mystical experience. One night, she dreamt that a glowing figure, resembling her husband, lay beside her. As she gazed at the figure, a beam of light from Lord Shiva's image shot out and entered her. Overcome by the powerful vision, Chandra fell unconscious. When she woke up, she shared this experience with her husband when he returned from pilgrimage. To Khudiram, it was clear the divine child was coming, just as his dream had foretold. A year later, the divine child was born. Learned astrologers predicted a great future for the baby. Khudiram, overjoyed, named him Gadadhar in honor of his dream in Gaya. As the years passed, Gadadhar grew into a curious and intelligent young boy. Even at a very young age, he amazed everyone with his sharp memory. He quickly learned the names of his ancestors, hymns to the gods, and stories from India's great epics. Despite his brilliance, Gadadhar wasn't like the other children. He wasn't interested in subjects like mathematics, but was deeply drawn to spiritual stories and the lives of saints. His focus on these topics often made him forget everything around him, pulling him into deep thought and meditation. Sometimes Gadadhar would fall into trances, losing all connection to the world around him. It didn't take much to send him into these states. whether it was a spiritual story or even something as simple as a beautiful scene. One day, when Gadadhar was about 6 or 7, something remarkable happened. It was a typical day in June or July, and he was walking along a narrow path through the paddy fields, eating puffed rice from a basket. Suddenly, he looked up and saw a dark thundercloud spreading across the sky. As the clouds covered the horizon, a flock of white cranes flew past. The contrast between the dark clouds and the bright cranes was so beautiful that it sent Gadadhar into a deep trance. Lost in the beauty of the moment, Gadadhar collapsed, and the puffed rice fell in all directions. He lay there, unconscious, until some villagers found him and carried him home. This was the first time he had completely lost consciousness in ecstasy, but it wouldn't be the last. Gadadhar's trances became more frequent, and each time, it was a struggle to bring him back to normal. In 1843, Gadadhar's father passed away. This loss had a profound effect on the young boy. The responsibility of the family fell on his eldest brother Ramkumar, but Gadadhar couldn't shake the deep sadness of losing his loving father. He began to ponder the temporary nature of life. Gadadhar often spent hours alone, sitting quietly in the nearby mango grove or at the cremation ground, deeply absorbed in thought. He also found comfort in the company of wandering monks who would stop at the village's rest house. Their spiritual talks and readings from scriptures fascinated him. One day, his mother, Chandra, was shocked to see her son return home, covered in ashes and dressed like a holy man. Gadadhar's time with the monks had ignited a deep passion for spirituality within him, and he started turning away from worldly concerns. From that point on, Gadadhar lost all interest in school. He devoted himself to studying the epics and sacred books. But soon, tragedy struck the family. Ramkumar's wife passed away, leaving behind an infant son. His income also diminished, forcing him into debt. To support the family, he moved to Calcutta, opening a small Sanskrit school. A few months later, during a visit to Kamarpukur, Ramkumar noticed Gadadhar's disinterest in studies. Unable to manage alone, he decided to take Gadadhar to Calcutta, where he could oversee his education and get some help. With his mother's blessings, Gadadhar agreed, unknowingly stepping towards a future that would transform his life. In 1847, a wealthy widow named Rani Rasmani, well known in Calcutta for her philanthropy, decided to build a grand temple dedicated to the goddess Kali. She spared no expense, choosing a serene location on the eastern bank of the Ganga at Dakshineshwar, just 4 miles north of Calcutta. The temple was a sight to behold, a reflection of her deep devotion to Kali. The date for the installation of the goddess's image was set for May 31st, 1855. Rani Rasmani was determined to make the ceremony a grand success. But there was a problem. She was a Sudra by caste, and no Orthodox Brahmin was willing to serve as the priest for the ritual. To solve this, Ramkumar agreed to take on the role of the head priest. Soon after, Gadadhar, who had been living with Ramkumar in Calcutta, also moved to the tranquil temple gardens of Dakshineshwar. Here, surrounded by the peace and holiness of the temple, Gadadhar found himself in the perfect environment to dive deeper into his spiritual practices. Mathuranath, the son-in-law of Rani Rasmani, noticed the young and devoted Gadadhar. Captivated by his sincerity, he asked him to take charge of adorning the goddess Kali's image. Every morning, Gadadhar would carefully decorate the goddess with flowers, leaves, and sandalwood paste. In the evening, he dressed her in rich jewelry and fine clothes. With this role perfectly suited to his devotional nature, he poured his heart and soul into his work. In his free time, he sang beautiful devotional songs for the goddess. His voice filled with pure devotion. The entire temple would fall silent, entranced by his melodies, as if the goddess herself was listening. Yet, as time passed, Gadadhar, now increasingly known as Ramakrishna, began to withdraw from the material world. Ramkumar grew increasingly troubled by his brother's growing indifference to the world. Sri Ramakrishna spent more time alone, lost in thought and longing for something beyond the material. Worried, Ramkumar resolved to teach him the rituals of worshipping Kali, hoping this sacred duty would ground him. To begin his formal training, Ramkumar sent Ramakrishna to Kinaram Bhattacharya, a Brahmin in Calcutta known for his deep devotion. But the moment the sacred initiation mantra was uttered, something extraordinary happened. Sri Ramakrishna, overwhelmed with divine fervor, shouted and plunged into a deep trance, which greatly astonished his guru. From that day, Ramkumar asked Ramakrishna to take on the worship of the Divine Mother, and soon he was permanently placed in charge of the worship of Kali. To Ramakrishna, the image of Kali was not merely an idol of stone. She was the mother herself, his guide in times of darkness. He offered her his complete devotion, pouring his heart and soul into each act of worship. Slowly, he began to distance himself from the world, shunning the company of worldly people. At night, when the temple grounds were quiet and the world asleep, Ramakrishna would steal away to the jungle, returning only in the morning. His eyes would be swollen as though from weeping or glazed from hours of deep meditation. The desire to experience the divine grew stronger with each passing day, filling his every thought. He would weep like a child, crying out, "O Mother, where art thou? Reveal thyself to me." The intensity of his longing was such that he could no longer perform the rituals as before. While meditating, he would place a flower on his head and sit in complete stillness for hours or stare at the food offering, convinced that the mother was actually partaking of it. At first, people ridiculed him for these strange acts, calling him mad. But his inner torment only grew. His heart was consumed by a longing so deep that he feared he might never realize the Divine Mother in this lifetime. Unable to bear the separation from the mother any longer, life became unbearable. One day, overcome by despair, his eyes fell on the sword kept in Kali's temple. Determined to end his life, he leaped up like a madman and seized it. But in that moment, the Blessed Mother revealed herself to him. The vision was so powerful, he collapsed unconscious at her feet. From that day forward, his one prayer became the desire for another vision of the Divine Mother. He would cry so bitterly in his longing that people gathered around him in wonder. But in the moments when his outwardly consciousness faded, when the pain of separation became too much to bear, she would appear again. In 1861, at Dakshineshwar, a fateful morning heralded the arrival of an extraordinary figure who would leave an indelible mark on Ramakrishna's spiritual journey. Sri Ramakrishna was plucking flowers in the temple garden when a small boat docked at the pier. outstepped Bhairavi Brahmani, a radiant middle-aged woman with a spiritual aura. She was a renunciate, well-versed in Vaishnava and Tantrika scriptures. Her eyes sparkled with a divine purpose as she approached Sri Ramakrishna, who stood waiting with curious reverence. Their meeting was no coincidence. The Bhairavi believed she was destined to find Ramakrishna. With motherly tenderness, she reassured him that his deep spiritual ecstasies, which many dismissed as madness, were instead signs of Mahabhava, the pinnacle of devotional love as described in the scriptures. Soon, the Bhairavi settled in Aryadaha, not far from Dakshineshwar. She became a mentor to Sri Ramakrishna, guiding him through complex tantrika practices. With unparalleled zeal, he immersed himself in these rigorous disciplines, achieving mastery in record time, often within days. Through these practices, Sri Ramakrishna attained profound realizations, establishing himself as a master of the Tantrika path. The Bhairavi's confidence in him grew, and she declared him to be an incarnation of the divine. To validate her claims, the Bhairavi organized a gathering of renowned scholars. Among them were Vaishnava Charan, a leader of the Vaishnava tradition, and Gaurikanta, a Tantrika scholar. What began as skepticism ended in awe. Both scholars acknowledged Sri Ramakrishna as a spiritual powerhouse, a rare vessel of divine energy. Gaurikanta proclaimed, "You are that mine of infinite spiritual power, an incarnation meant to awaken humanity." Amid these developments, Sri Ramakrishna's devotion deepened. As their time together drew to a close, the Bhairavi, her purpose fulfilled, prepared to leave. With tears in her eyes, she bade farewell, leaving behind a disciple who was now a master in his own right. After years of intense devotion and practice, Ramakrishna reached a new milestone in his spiritual journey. By now, he had explored and realized the essence of all the major paths of devotion, experiencing God as a friend, child, lover, and a master. But a deeper realization awaited, the state where all forms dissolve into oneness with the infinite. In 1864, a wandering monk named Todapuri arrived at Dakshineshwar, a master of Advaita Vedanta. Todapuri believed in the oneness of the Absolute, where there is no form, no duality, only pure consciousness. When Todapuri saw Ramakrishna, he was impressed by the purity of his devotion, but noticed Ramakrishna's attachment to the Divine Mother in her form. Todapuri challenged him to transcend this attachment and experience the formless and absolute Brahman. Ramakrishna agreed to Todapuri's initiation. At midnight, under Todapuri's guidance, he performed the sacred rites of renunciation, symbolically severing all ties with the world. But as he sat in meditation, a radiant vision of the Divine Mother appeared before him, making it impossible to let go of her image. Ramakrishna confessed this to Todapuri. To help him concentrate, Todapuri pressed a point between Ramakrishna's eyebrows. With unwavering determination, Ramakrishna focused his mind. At last, wielding his inner resolve as a sword, he severed the vision of the Mother. His mind soared beyond all dualities, finally merging into the infinite. For 3 days and nights, Ramakrishna remained in this state of nirvikalpa samadhi, entirely unaware of the world. When Ramakrishna returned to ordinary consciousness, he described his experience as a vast ocean of bliss, where all distinctions of I and you had disappeared. Tota Puri stayed at Dakshineshwar for 11 months, ensuring Ramakrishna was firmly established in this highest state of spiritual realization. During this time, Tota Puri himself underwent a transformation, realizing that Brahman and Shakti, formless and form, are not separate but one. Though he had attained the pinnacle of non-dual realization, Ramakrishna received a command from the Divine Mother to remain at the threshold of duality and non-duality for the benefit of humanity.